I think there are a lot of people out there that have traits that would work well as managers, but I don't think any manager has ever been born. They have to be made one way or another. It's whether hard knocks or someone who takes the time to pour into them and build them up, or, a lot of trial and error and a lot of mistakes. Like, you gotta, one way or another. So might as well expedite the process. Yeah.
Hello and welcome to the Bar Business Podcast, where we help bar owners increase profits, attract loyal guests, and simplify operations so you can avoid burnout and finally enjoy your life outside of your bar. I'm your host, Chris Schneider, the Bar Business Coach. The Bar Business Podcast is brought to you by QuickSpec. And full disclosure, I'm a co-founder. We built QuickSpec to give you back your time and help you work smarter, not harder. QuickSpec connects your POS data, layers in real-world context, and gives you actionable forecasts and KPI dashboards that allow you to make data-driven decisions so you can spend less time guessing and more time on what matters. Staff smarter, order better. Stop planning for rushes that never show up or getting caught off guard by the ones that do. When you make decisions based upon real data, not guesswork, you get your time back and your team runs smoothly. Check it out at quickspec.com. That's QUIXSPEC.com. And make sure to sign up for our early access program on the homepage. Today, we have a great guest joining us, and we're actually doing something a little bit different today than we normally do. We've talked to a lot of consultants. We've talked to a lot of owners. We've talked to a lot of people that work around the industry. But what I wanted to do was talk to somebody who is very good and has grown in the industry as an employee. Because I think a lot of times when we're talking about owners and with consultants and people, we're missing kind of that employee experience. So joining us today is Andrew Roy. He is the general manager of Mahogany Prime Steakhouse in Omaha. He is a certified sommelier, and he's the host of the Serves You Right podcast, which if you haven't listened to, go check it out. It's a great podcast. Andrew, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me on. It's a real pleasure. Good to talk to you again.
Yeah, it's great to talk again. If you didn't catch it, I was on his podcast.
Episode 53. Yeah.
So go check it out. We had a great conversation there. But Andrew, just because I feel like I'm normally talking to owners and stuff, and one of the first questions that always comes up is, what is your journey? And for a lot of those folks, their journey wasn't necessarily in the hospitality industry. I know for you, it is entirely different. You've really grown up in this industry over the years. So tell us a little bit about your journey as an employee through the industry.
I started off very young, probably too young legally to be working in hospitality, but I grew up in a small town in Texas called Pampa. There was a little bar/grill on the edge of town called Smokin' Joe's Bar and Grill, and they were looking for someone who could work odd nights, like Tuesday, Wednesday, to give the owner some time off. I was the cook, waiter, and dishwasher at the same time, to kind of give you an idea of how small the spot was. And I loved it. I don't know why I loved it, but I did. The money was easy, and from that spot, I quickly realized that if I wanted to increase my earning potential, I had to go somewhere where you could actually fit some more people in the building. I went to a little spot called The Plaza, just slinging enchiladas, and super busy. I thought, this is great. Making all this money. I was saving up to buy a car, like all the normal, typical teenage stuff. Go to college, figure might as well just keep on this journey. So I walked into a spot in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I went to college called Tabla de los Santos. And I didn't have much experience outside of my small town in Texas. So they said, we could use you as a busser. And I thought, fair enough. Came back the next day. I noticed that they are extremely disorganized. The guy I'd talked to wasn't there. And the other manager on duty asked what I was doing, and I said, I'd been hired, and I didn't outright lie, but I kind of implied like I'd been hired as a waiter, and so I started waiting there. The guy that hired me eventually got over that small deception because I was doing a pretty good job, and during college, I'd just work on the weekends just for some spare cash, and one winter I stayed behind, and they needed actually a little bit of help in the bar. A couple of the bartenders got sick, and so I said, whatever, I'll pick up some extra money. I'll work some Friday, Saturdays. All my friends are out of town anyway. And I worked that one weekend, and I fell in love with it. And the bartenders told the restaurant that they weren't giving me back, and I became their bar back. Sadly, at 19, so I had to wait a couple of years before I could actually pour anything legally. But I was very good at doing dishes and supporting and kind of figuring out how things were going. Started bartending at 21, fell in love with wine. There was a gentleman in Santa Fe giving a free class, and I started attending, and I thought, wow, this is super interesting. This is super complex, but it activated all my nerd reflexes of like very minute and very specific, detailed, hard to understand, but really fascinating info. And it gets you drunk. And I was like, this is everything that I'm interested in college. So started studying, and the quartermaster Psalms was giving a test in Denver. So me and my best friend at the time drove up, got the intro, and thought, man, this is fun. Started working at an Italian spot and really, really just started digging in. It was like reading about wine, tasting wine with friends, formed a tasting group. We went and got our next level for the quartermaster Psalms. Then they were looking for someone to help kind of manage the bar at this Italian place. I started doing that. We'll talk more about this, I'm sure, but I was probably one of the worst managers you've ever seen. Learned some quick lessons about what not to do. And then met a lovely lady, Russian, and fell in love, married her, and moved off to take care of her parents, and walked into a random steakhouse in town called Mahogany and asked if they're hiring for a server. And so it's a long journey to today, but that's how I got to where I'm at.
I mean, that is a long journey, but I feel like for a lot of people that end up in this industry, and we had talked about this a little bit on your podcast, that you kind of just default into it for a lot of folks because it's something you've always done, or it's as you are going through life, it's just what you're doing, and you kind of just end up here, even if that wasn't your intention. And along those lines, let me ask you a very random question, but what did you study in college?
St. John's College in Santa Fe. So it's liberal arts. It's kind of a weird school. Their whole shtick is they do the Great Books program. So it's all the classic works of Western literature. And instead of like, just textbooks and lectures, you're actually reading like Newton when you're doing calculus. You're actually reading like the source materials. So super, super interesting, super expensive. still paying that off. But definitely one of the best decisions I think I've ever made, because it taught me a lot of how to think and how to learn.
Which are both great, but the reason I asked that is because that has nothing to do with bars or restaurants, right?
0%, yes.
That is far away from hospitality, especially if we're talking about reading Newton and understanding calculus. Because I don't know many people in hospitality that understand calculus, if I'm honest.
Algebra, yeah.
Yeah, I took Algebra 1 in college, and I did very poorly. But my major was hospitality, so it didn't really matter. As you were talking through your journey there, you had mentioned that when you first became a manager, you weren't a very good one.
Yes.
So tell me about that. What led to you not being a good manager when you first became a manager?
So I will kind of give you the background. That Italian spot I worked at is called Il Piatto. Great food, really, they're known for their early, late happy hour. You can get like half off appetizers. They probably changed it. It's been probably 15 years, but still, really fantastic spot. Started as a waiter, got promoted into the bar position, and I was just young. That's part of it, just transparently. I was 24, 25. I would say, knowing what I know now, that I wouldn't necessarily have called myself a manager. I was more like a key employee. Someone that they trusted with the keys to lock the store up, but anyone really would have given me a lot of authority, which is great because at the time I probably shouldn't have taken any. I will say it takes two to tango. So I definitely could have brought more maturity and a little bit more self-reflection to the role. They did see that over the course of years that I was reliable, showed up, would always get my shifts covered, or, I checked a lot of boxes of, hard to fake signals of trustworthiness. But I was still 24. And, just like any 24-year-old, having a great time, attracted to the other bartender and hitting on the waitress and doing all the things that you'd expect a 24-year-old male to do, which maybe isn't the best thing to do when you are entrusted with the keys to the building. So, yeah.
Well, that's true. One of the things that I noticed as you talk through that is you talked about, you were young, you were doing things young people do. Like that's all, I think, kind of a given, especially in an environment where we're hanging out at night and there's booze involved. Like we have to be careful. But at the same time, it doesn't sound like you were given much direction in those areas either.
Yeah, that's true. I would say that my training in respect to management probably mirrored the training that a lot of restaurants and bars have, where it's not like this is what you do, but more observe. I got to see what the general manager did on a day-to-day basis, what the owners would do when they were in, but never was it really discussed like how to do it, or like, there was no interactive element. It was just, you are that person, emulate what you've seen, which maybe someone with a little more maturity or experience could have done that, but I definitely could.
To me, when we think about that, emulate what you see, because you're right, that is how most training in this industry unfortunately happens. But when we say emulate what you see, you have to have a great example, right? If you don't have a perfect shining example of a manager to copy, that's kind of a big ask for people, I would think.
Yeah. Yeah. And, uh, say what you will about Santa Fe. It's got its good and bad points, but it's got a strong culture of drinking and partying and having fun. And I, have seen some great examples of maturity and leadership and management, but I got to see plenty of examples that did not live up to that name too. So, yeah.
But now, obviously, if we're talking, you started in Santa Fe managing in your 20s, and
Hmm.
it's, you weren't necessarily set up great, but now you're managing a quite nice, quite high-end steakhouse
Yeah.
that is definitely in that fine dining category. So along the way there, something had to have changed in your approach to management.
Oh, sure.
And
Yeah.
did that come through just time and experience? Did that come through additional training you got? How did you develop as a manager over that time?
Oh, sure, sure. So I would say, my time in Santa Fe was all kind of not the shining example of management, but when I meet my wife and then end up moving and going to Mahogany, that's when things really started turning around. So Mahogany is part of a larger group of restaurants called Hal Smith Restaurants. They have about 80 different locations across more than 10 concepts throughout the middle of the US. And, when you work for anything chain-ish, and I wouldn't call us full on chain, but we're like chain-ish. There's a corporate office, but it's still just a couple of people that started it, sort of thing. Once you get past that one or two locations, I feel like you almost by necessity have to have some sort of structure. So I started there and, walked in off the street, and the general manager, I didn't know this at the time, was the lady that actually interviewed me. And she hired me, started as a server, and then just looking around and just kind of seeing how the place ran, seeing what the training program was when I went through the training program, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do because I didn't want to bartend for my whole life. There's only so long you can carry kegs around without like really starting to fill it. And so I asked the general manager, Amy, if she was looking for a manager, and she said yes. So I put my name in the hat, and they were happy to have me. And, I would love to say that was the end, a very straight line to just perfection, but that's definitely not true. I quickly learned the whole lack of things that I probably should have known in the past. I got thrown in, they decided to kind of toughen me up by starting me off in the kitchen and training me back of house first. And it was an interesting step because I've never had any back house experience. And so all of a sudden I was thrown into chopping things and doing inventory and all the parts of running a restaurant or bar that I haven't had any experience with. And I'm quickly learning, what exactly, first in, first out really looks like at a very busy restaurant, what it means to, calculate inventory where you have the starting cost of goods, purchase it. Like, I I am thrown into the deep end, and it was a struggle for a while, honestly. Um, I definitely did a little bit of brute force work and just tried to take my all to it every day, and sometimes did not achieve the standard even they were looking for. But yeah, I kept coming back, and I didn't stop until I finally got a hold of something. And kind of a funny story that I was reminded of the other day. When I went through my first training in the back of house, the morning crew, or the people that clean everything, prep it. There's a guy, Roman Santiago, and they train you through every section. So I was doing 3 days with him, cleaning, scrubbing the floors, and this guy has trained all the managers, and he doesn't speak perfect English, but well enough that we could figure out what was going on. And I'm just following him the whole time, and I'm cleaning what he cleans, just asking him what to do. And at one point, he is going towards the restrooms, and I'm following him. He's like, no, 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 I'm actually going to the restroom. Like, I don't need help here. and he was telling me this because he's like, I knew you'd be a good manager because no one else followed me like you did. You even followed me to the restroom. Like you were in it. So,
Well, I think that's a really good point, right? It's a manager or as an owner, if you want to really understand what your employees are doing, you have to follow them,
you have
right?
to.
You have to be involved.
Yeah.
Now, you had mentioned, so you had kind of a rough management training in Santa Fe. Then you joined Mahogany, and they have a much more formal system where you learned all the things that you didn't know before.
Mm-hmm.
And so in your experience, because one of the things that I think a lot of owners have issues with is knowing, hey, here's what I need to teach my folks to be effective at their job. And some of that is because not every owner has done it all, right? Has worked through all the positions. Some of that is just because, even me, where I've done a lot of it, sometimes I forget. Right? And
Yeah.
I wouldn't train somebody on something because I'd be like, "Oh yeah, that's just the simple shit. Everybody knows that." Well, it's actually not. So, where do you see when we're talking about that transition into management? Where do you see the gaps that kind of are most pervasive in the industry?
Gaps in ability to transfer knowledge to people joining the management team. I would think a big thing that I think Mahogany and Housesmith does right is holding on to a regular cadence of review and also kind of open conversation. And so, we have a very formalized, we know once a month we're going to sit down, me and the general manager, and we're going to have this one-on-one 30 minutes uninterrupted of this is what you're doing. This is what I've seen. Here's your goals and priorities. And do you have anything for me? And I do that now with my managers too. And then twice a year, it's a longer kind of 2-hour thing with a whole evaluation. And this is where you're doing at every level. And this is what we see. And what are your goals? And, that's the point in time where we talk about raises, if raises are on the table. And so I think without that regular cadence, it's easy in the day-to-day to kind of let people do what they're doing. And it's, delegation's great, but it's almost like abdicating your responsibility by delegating it away and not checking, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, nothing's done and no one knows what they're doing. And I had no idea all this time, and yes. And, I'm saying that too. And like remembering times when I thought projects were done and it just wasn't clear what I was looking for. And, I guess we could have saved ourselves a lot of time by just taking a few moments to chat. So gaps in ability to transfer knowledge to like new managers. Some of the biggest gaps that I've seen, I feel like, and I think our industry is one that this is really always going to be an issue. I feel like emotional regulation is a big area that a lot of people that I've worked with and brought into management and unfortunately let go from management have all like struggled with. Leaving difficult to handle emotions at the door and, treating each day like a new day and just not letting it overwhelm you. I've seen grown men yell at like 19-year-olds for doing silly things and like, I get it. It's Friday and it's 7:00 and you're stressed, but you gotta communicate the message to that hostess without making her cry. Like you just have
Mm-hmm.
to. Yeah. That would be one of the big ones. And then, I'm sure you deal with this a lot, a general fear and a general hesitancy towards numbers. So
Mm-hmm.
no one liked math, apparently, that ends up in restaurants. And, love it or hate it, you are going to live or die by whether or not you're profitable. And so if you don't know how to figure out, I know you're big with beer sales. If you don't know how to figure out whether or not your keg systems are working, you're going to lose money. And you're going to lose money silently and slowly over a long course of time. If you don't know how to
Mm-hmm.
cost out your wine, you are going to lose money. And so, it's not a lot. It's like 5 or 6 formulas, and like, if you really want to up your game, take an accounting class and maybe join the general management team someday. But really, if you're running a bar, you've got to understand what cost of goods means. You've got to understand how to read some very simple Excel sheets. Yeah.
Well, and I think, as part of this conversation, it's something that you should know before you become a manager, right? This should be part of everyone's training, is just
Mm,
to let everybody know these numbers. Because I don't know your personal experience with giving folks numbers, but I was a big fan of like giving my whole team the P&L because, hey, you know what? Some months we win, some months we lose. Here you go. Look at it. And then everybody can understand, hey, this is what's going on. And it actually motivates people.
mhm.
When your team doesn't understand the numbers, and I'm sure you probably have some really good personal experience in this space, they don't even know how to manipulate them. They don't know how to be better.
Sure, sure. Yeah. I share the full P&L with our whole management team. We
Mhm.
usually, with the like frontline servers, only really talk about sales per day, which,
Yeah.
is kind of their like lever on what's happening on the P&L. But
Mhm.
yeah, you know, if you don't, if you don't know, you just like, how do you improve what you don't know? How do you lose weight if you don't step on the scale?
Right.
You don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it seems like all this really comes down to a little bit about emotional maturity, a little bit about understanding the numbers, and a little bit about how to manage. And so this gap that could seem quite large in what we're giving managers when they first become managers and what they need, it actually really isn't that big of a gap. It's just we have to do something about it.
Hmm.
Does that seem fair in your opinion?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a good kind of overview. I would add, you know, I think there are a lot of people out there that have traits that would work well as managers, but I don't think any manager has ever been born. They have to be made one way or another.
Mhm.
It's whether hard knocks or someone who takes the time to pour into them and build them up, or gosh, a lot of trial and error and a lot of mistakes. Like you gotta, yeah, one way or another. So might as well expedite the process. Yeah.
100%. And so I want to pivot a little bit here because one of the things that's interesting, quite frequently on this podcast, we have a lot of bar people, we have a lot of restaurant people, or well, we have some restaurant people, but normally it's more casual dining. You work in kind of the top tier of the industry in fine dining, if you will. Although we could have a whole separate conversation about what fine dining means
Yeah.
nowadays.
2 or 3 hours. Yeah.
But you're definitely working towards the top end of the industry. What do you see? Because there's a lot of specificity. There's a lot of very high end training. There's a lot of very a lot of additional attention to detail that you see in fine dining that you don't see on the casual side. And I think a lot of times that people in especially the bar industry, we have a tendency to look at fine dining and go, ah, yeah, who wants to do that? There are tablecloths and shit. Like that just sounds annoying. But at the same time, there's a lot of fine dining knowledge and a lot of fine dining standards that are very applicable to the lower end of the industry, the bar industry. Even if you own a dive bar, there's stuff from fine dining that's applicable. So,
Sure.
what do you think that bars can learn from kind of that high end fine dining experience side of the industry?
Yeah. This is something I've thought about a lot. So kind of my background too, to kind of inform the answer. In Santa Fe, before I left, I worked at this place, Coyote Cafe and Cantina, and it is probably one of the nicest, if not like top nice, top 100 in the whole world awesome, fantastic food. The guy that owns that was a part owner of Geronimo, another amazing restaurant. But they actually, the reason I bring them up is they also have attached to their fine dining indoor, very high end restaurant, patio that's open on the summers, and it is casual dining, like street food, tacos and Coronas and shot of tequilas. And so a lot of the crew that was working inside during the summer would work outside as well. So you get to see that, juxtaposition of these two different worlds collide. And I think the thread that the important thing that is present in all of fine dining, serving the food from the left and clearing from the right and drinks from the right and open face and the tablecloths and polishing the glasses, it's honestly attention. It's paying attention to the guest that's in front of you. And I think that secret you can take anywhere. And you're not going to have tablecloths in the dive bar, but are you, looking up and catching people by the eye when they enter, even if you can't help them right away? That is one small aspect that you could say is informed by fine dining. It's seeing the person that's coming in, your guest, as a guest, actually giving them something precious, your attention, and trying to serve them in the way that you are, most capable of, whatever's possible, and just seeing them. And in the era of TikTok and everyone's on their phones and no one's paying attention anyways, that is something unique. And, you can have bad experiences in fine dining atmospheres when they're not paying attention. I could tell you horror stories about people who forgot to sell the food, and I've got guests who've been waiting for an hour without steaks and everything in between. But I think that's the thread that kind of ties together why people like the fine dining and what you can take from fine dining into any restaurant. It's attention. Are you actually paying attention?
I couldn't agree more, because that is, to me, the biggest thing with fine dining is that attention to detail. The other thing that you said that I kind of want to hit on real quick is actually seeing the guest, right? Realizing that not every guest is the same, and knowing how to adapt what you do just that little bit to make the guest perfectly comfortable.
It's one of those things. And, I go back and forth on the question of, can you teach hospitality or do people have it innately? And, I do think you can help foster it. I do think some people have more of a natural just disposition in that direction. But, I'm thinking back to this time in Santa Fe, and there's this bartender that worked there, Leahi Mayfield, and she, I walked in, it's El Paseo Bar Grill, just this random spot, and it was my 22-year-old days, so I ordered a vodka Red Bull, because of course I did. And then next time I came back in, she recognized me as I was coming up to the bar, and she had it ready for me. I'll always remember that. I'm like, oh, this girl's paying attention. And, after that, we ended up, getting to know each other, became friends. But when you have those moments when someone actually sees you and notices that you're different and responds to you in kind, you don't forget that. This has been 13 years later that I'm still remembering that first trip into this random divey bar in Santa Fe that no longer exists. And it's still there because someone was just paying attention enough to remember me.
One last thing I want to hit on before I let you go for the day, which is wine, because you are a certified sommelier, which for everyone listening, if you have no clue what that means that Andrew spent a whole lot of time, hundreds of hours studying wine, and knows more about it than probably 99% of the people on the planet. Because that quartermaster sommeliers is a very difficult process to go through.
Yeah.
Now, with that said, because you do know all about wine, and you probably know more about wine regions than I've ever even tried to read. But what can bars do? Because we don't sell a lot of wine in a lot of cases, especially your dive bars, right? For a lot of folks, it's under 10% of what they're selling. But wine is still an essential part of every bar, in my opinion. I don't think you can have a bar without having some wine. So, how can a bar that does a small volume of wine run a good wine program and actually give folks what they're looking for?
Mm, yeah. No, that's an interesting question. So, first thing I'm going to say is always default to fresh. So, fresh is always going to be better. So, if you're a dive bar and you think you might sell 2 bottles of wine over the course of a week, you shouldn't have 5 offerings because, the second you open a bottle of wine, you're in a race against air, and air is trying to turn the wine into vinegar. So, you don't want to serve your guest vinegar. You don't. So, if you have a choice between more or less, and I'd recommend to test it too. See if people respond to having a couple more. You'll find your sweet spot pretty quickly. Depending on what state you're located in, you can likely get, instead of full cases, just a couple bottles. So this is something you can actually truly test because you don't want to be on the line for a couple $100 case of Napa Cab that you just aren't going to sell at your dive bar. Just you're going to take it home and drink it eventually, or let it go bad and pour it out. So 1 or 2 bottles. I don't know why this seems to happen, but for small restaurants, not like full on dive bars, but just kind of more casual locations, there's always some sales rep that finds a way in and convinces whoever's buying the booze that they can sell like Viognier. And so they get like a case of Viognier. And so you see it in like all these little bars where it's like normal listing, and then 7-year-old Viognier that's been around, the one case they bought, they haven't been able to sell in 7 years. So anyone, even if it's a great deal, really think about, do I need this case of strange white wine? Will this sell? Test it. Buy 1 bottle. When it doesn't sell in 2 months, you'll be glad you didn't buy a case. And I see it everywhere. It's the wildest thing. One thing that I would recommend that I've had a lot of luck with, don't assume that every guest is going to want the standard pour of wine. Typical pour is 5 to 6 ounces in most restaurants and bars, but we started offering an option of 6 or 9. And the number of people that actually take us up on that is pretty impressive. And, standard 750 milliliter bottle of wine is 25.3 ounces. You get 3 of those sold, you're onto a fresh bottle. So all of a sudden you're already freshening up your bottles and, it's the McDonald's, would you like to supersize that? But people want to supersize it. So let them pay, let the guests pay you more, might as well. And then last thing, go on Amazon and search for wine air pump. And so super cheap. You just put it on top at the end of the night, make it part of the closing duty of the bartenders, pump the air out. It is not foolproof. It will not make your wine last forever, but it will give you a couple more days. And so in an industry where every cent counts and it's a game of nickels and dimes, every bottle you don't waste is money in your pocket. So just keep that in mind. And then, yeah, we can get into if Joe Schmo on the street doesn't know the name of the grape that you're trying to pick, you probably are picking the wrong wine for your bar. If you're picking something, I believe you're a big fan of this, you should probably make it typical. Don't pick up the Napa Cab that is drinking like a Pinot Noir. No one wants that. They want a Napa Cab when they say Napa Cab. If you're getting Sauvignon Blanc, don't get a barrel-aged version that drinks like a Chardonnay. Get a Sauvignon Blanc, and then, okay, last plug, but this is worth it. Kelly White, one of the world's best wine writers, has a book, Wine Confident. It is written for beginning wine, just like the basics of the basics. She does a great job. She calls it wine baby talk, but she refuses to do it. She doesn't dumb it down, but she makes it as simple as possible. And she's got some very, very good common sense advice on what to think about wine, how to think about wine, how to sell wine, and couldn't recommend it highly enough. I've recommended it to pretty much all of our servers. So,
oh, nice. Well, that's a great tip. And one question on the wine air pumps, because I am huge on those.
Hmm.
But one of the arguments that I will see go back and forth from time to time is, should you also hit it with like argon before you pump it? And for those of you who are listening who don't know, argon is a gas that's heavier than air. So in theory, it's going to sit on top of that wine and prevent oxygen from getting to it. Um, but Andrew, do you think that actually makes a difference?
I've never tested it. Just be upfront there. What I have done with inert gas, if you ever used a Corvin, I can describe it for the a guest list. Yeah. So there's a device called a Corvin, and essentially you take a needle, you stick it through the cork, and because cork will expand afterwards, you don't really get a lot of air intake in there. You pump the wine out very slowly, and you replace it with this inert argon gas. And so when you do it in that setup, it will last a lot longer. Again, not indefinitely, because you do puncture the cork. There is some oxygen ingress, but I've used that for blind wine tasting, and that's been great. You save yourself thousands of dollars. You can just taste and taste and taste. So it works. Theoretically, it works. I would say if you are in a situation where you're going through that little wine in that amount of time, it might be better to kind of look at your, are you selling the wrong wine? Or like, is there something else you can change? Because argon gas is not cheap. And so, yeah, it seems like you have like a tiny cut and you're going to like urgent care, or, like you're going to the hospital just for a tiny cut. And it's like, maybe we can deal with this at home with a Band-Aid. Maybe we can get a different bottle that speaks to our guests. Maybe the people that work for me do not know how to sell this wine. Maybe we could get a staff training, that, even without a wine pump, you should be able to sell that wine the next day and it should be pretty fine,
Yeah,
So,
100%.
yeah.
And final question on wine here before we wrap it up. What is your opinion on like splits? And I know a lot of times when we're looking at, the 187 bottles, a lot of those, especially when you go into bars, they're going to be lower end brands. But then you've avoided all waste at the same time.
Sure.
But you've also, in an effort to avoid all waste, you've given up on a lot of variety and a lot of, for lack of a better way to put it, really, really good wine that just isn't expensive in favor of big corporate wine.
Yeah. Yeah. I think my answer to this would be, you've got to choose which difficulty to have, if that makes sense. So if you're in a dive bar, you've tried wine a couple times, the wine always goes bad, you still want to offer wine, splits might be the way to go. That way you can sell a bunch on Friday and Saturday, not have to worry about it on Tuesday, Wednesday when who's coming in to order wine. So there's that aspect. It is a lot of mass market wine. Yeah. I actually do utilize some. You can find some that are decent. What I've found for splits, and one of the reasons I carry them in my restaurant, Prosecco. Prosecco is a good one. It's right at that price point. You can guarantee it's always fully sparkling. So it seems like it makes sense for bubbles, because bubbles go, flat pretty quickly no matter what you do. You pump them out, they'll go flat even faster. So yeah, it's like, yeah, which problem do you want, essentially? And I guess in life there are no solutions, only compromises. So
that, if nothing else, that is true in the hospitality industry, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So with that, unfortunately, we've kind of run out of time, but tell everybody about your podcast, where they can see more about you and where they can learn more.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I run a podcast. I talk to a lot of fantastic guests. You're on there too. Serves You Right is the name. You can find it at servesyouRightPod.com. All one word, no punctuation. And it's me trying to figure out, what's going on in this industry. And it's me kind of exploring, the people that I wish I could have talked to when I was starting out, the information I wish I could have had when I was younger, and all the things that I think are cool, interesting, fun. So it's an eclectic mix of people that are into wine and beer. There's some people that are spirits heavy. There's all sorts of stuff in there. So we got a new episode every Tuesday, starting in January, every Tuesday and Thursday. So,
Oh, sweet.
yeah. And, I
Awesome.
have a contact on the servesyouRightpod.com. So if you have any questions, issues, complaints, anything, feel free to reach out. I always get back. It's really exciting to hear from people that are listening. So,
Well, fantastic. And for everybody listening, of course, as always, those links will be in the show notes to check out the Serves You Right podcast and to get a hold of Andrew if you want to. Andrew, it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. It was fantastic.
That about wraps it up for today. If you enjoyed today's insights, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a review. If you are ready to take your bar to the next level, schedule a strategy session with me by clicking the link in the show notes below. Until next time, have a great day, and we will talk again later.